I don't know how fast, but yeah, the problem is people don't wake up.
Well, how
So
are you going to get out of the house if you're on the top floor? The whole house is filled up. You got
yeah,
to
if
hold your
you're
breath and
awake,
run.
you'd be able to run downstairs and get out.
Yeah.
That you'd be okay with. But you if the other thing is a lot of those carbon monoxide detectors are on the ceiling. So say you have your door open, carbon monoxide fills up over your bed before it hits that ceiling detector. You might have been in that for who knows how long before your ceiling detector goes off, and maybe you're not waking up from that.
Jesus Christ.
So that's where I think it's, the wall plugins are great because they're lower to the ground, but having one on your basement and your first floor I think are great safety precautions.
My God. That scared the shit out because I don't really think about it too often, you know what I mean? Everybody's so busy with their lives and your mind is in so many other places all the time that you
Yeah,
don't think about, one day through no fault of your own, there was just happened to be some kind of carbon monoxide leak from one of your appliances and all of a sudden,
yeah,
I remember there was a story a few years ago about an entire family that was just dead.
yeah, and that's the risk. So I always, it's not. Some other inspectors are like, "Oh, it's not part of building code. Why would you put that in your report?" And I'm like, I feel like I'm doing an injustice not making this recommendation to my clients by just, saying recommend installing a CO detector on every level of the home.
If there
Just
wasn't a better way to say get a home inspector.
yeah.
You will die. It's like that commercial or that movie
Yeah,
for like abstinence. Remember? I can't remember what movie it was. It's like if you have sex, you will die.
yeah, yeah.
Welcome to Supply and Demand with Adam Nadler. This is a podcast dedicated to the real estate market in Canada, available now on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify.
Is that what you say to freak people out for
Yeah.
the video?
And that's why we drink.
That's funny.
So hold on, I have a little water left here.
That's good. I don't know the
Let me
different
cheers you. This was a
different
gift.
McClellans.
I'm not a big McClellan guy in general, but this was a gift from a mortgage broker who I do a lot of podcasts with.
I don't drink a ton of scotch.
Oh, I love scotch. I don't drink a ton in general, but
Go portaging once a year, and that's all we bring is scotch.
cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sorry to freak you out a little bit.
I got a buddy who buys me a random bottle, whatever he finds, every year for my birthday.
Yeah.
Got me a Japanese one this year, which was pretty. I don't know what you call it, spicy, like a lot of bite to it.
A lot of bite.
Yeah, just like
I don't like that.
hits too much.
Yeah, I don't like bite,
Yeah,
and I don't like
yeah, that's
peaty.
nice and smooth and
It's not too peaty.
like that. Yeah,
It's a little peaty, but like not. It's not terrible. You know.
yeah, you can taste the oak in that one.
You can. It's actually
I like that.
it's kind of nice. I'm actually liking it more and more as I drink it more. Actually. So as I was saying, I guess before we started rolling, yeah, we did a podcast. Man, I was what, a year ago, year and a half ago,
Something like that.
and it's been up on YouTube. And then recently, all of a sudden, I got a comment out of nowhere. Like people have just been continuing to watch it and saw something. I don't know what part of the video they commented on. Because you can kind of see when people commented,
Yeah.
but on my end. But anyways, they're like, "Wow, this is great content. Thank you so much." And I saw that, and it came up as a notification. And I was like, "Wow, we should do another one." I totally forgot about that podcast we did,
Yeah.
and especially now when people are actually able to get inspections, market's a little soft, and someone going out shopping, So want to have you in. Take me through, because I've seen you do it a bunch of times, but a lot of people who are watching this haven't seen an inspector go through a house. Take me through top to bottom what you do. You've just pulled up in your car with all your gear. What's the first thing that you do?
Well, I would say I usually greet the clients, but I usually try and get there 15 to 20 minutes early so I can do the roof. Clients can't join me on the roof, so I try and get that done ahead of time. But after that, I highly encourage the clients to come around the house with me. It's just a lot better learning process. They're going to understand the issues that we find. So, Start on the roof. I'm checking, shingles, roof accessories, drainage, eaves troughs, all that sort of roof structure, all that sort of stuff up there. When I come down, after I've had my chat with the clients, I'll do a full lap around the outside of the house. We're going to be checking any visible structures like your foundation, exterior siding, doors, windows, attached structures to the house like garage, porch, deck, landscaping, mostly within close proximity to the house to make sure you don't have water pooling against the structure, things like that. Even, if there's outbuildings, even a shed, if there's electrical in it, I'll check that out because it could be you could have safety hazards in there.
Quick question though. Let's say you can't get up on the roof for whatever reason. How much can you see from down on the ground? And if you can kind of see the roof from down on the ground, what are you looking for in particular? What are you looking to see?
So I have in the last year joined, well, not joined, I've started using a drone. So now there's really no roof I can't inspect. I guess if it was pouring rain, then I might still not be able to inspect it and try and get some shots from the ground. And it really depends on the roof. Some of them have, really big houses are either flat roof or really steep slopes. Steep slopes, I can see most of the roof from the ground. If it's a flat roof, I can't see anything.
What what's the deal with flat roofs? I feel like a lot of people are more scared of them than they should be.
Um, I think it is a much bigger leak hazard, in
Oh,
my
it is.
opinion.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
well, there's a few different types of materials. EPDM is a rubber type of roofing on a flat roof. That's kind of the newer type. If you have that on your roof, you're going to be pretty good. That is meant to be fully waterproof. The problem with a lot of roofs is they use modified bitumen, which is an asphalt based, kind of like a shingle, but will roll on. And that's only designed to be waterproof up to 48 hours. So, especially the older a house gets, no flat roof should be truly flat. It needs to have slight slopage so that water is draining off and going towards the drainage system. A lot of the times, even if it has been sloped properly at the beginning, the roof will sag a little bit, and now you've got water that ponds on your roof. And the risk of leakage goes through the roof once water's sitting there. And I'll go up sometimes and there's 4 inches of water on the roof. That's not going to dissipate within 48 hours, and you're way higher for leakage. Older roofs had tar and gravel, which was basically gravel with a layer of tar and then gravel and a layer of tar. Those are just major leak hazards. If you've got one, even if it's not leaking now, it will leak.
So what do people do to kind of fix that?
Well, you can have then one of the newer types of membranes put on top of that, really, is the best recommendation. But yeah, there's some roofs where, older styles, 70s, they were doing a lot of flat roofs and before that. Really big houses often have that just because you just have to think if you've got a 6,000 square foot house, the perimeter of that house is so big to build it up, you might have a 40-foot peak on your roof, so that your trusses and your rafters can make it out to the edges. So that's why it's usually flat, instead, or else you have to build this giant structure so that your rafters can actually make it to the outside of the house.
And in terms of those shingles that sloped roofs have, I guess, what are the different types of shingles that you can have, and what are you looking for? Let's say if someone is standing on the ground and kind of just like looking up at the roof, what are you looking for? Curling or anything like that?
Yeah, cracking, curling, flaking. Are there any missing shingles? Most of that you can usually see it. If it's bad, you can see it from the ground almost always. One of the big problems is if you're on the ground, often you only be able to see one, two, or three slopes of the roof. You might not be able to get to the backyard to see that roof because you got to be able to stand far enough away to see those slopes. Often the backyard, you'd have to go to the neighbor's house to see that back slope. And the problem is the south side and the west side always deteriorate first because of they get a lot more sun exposure. So if the back side of the roof is the south side, the front side might look perfectly good. The back shingles might already be curled and broken, and you can't see that. So it's paramount really to get a view of the south and west sides to really tell how the roof is doing. As far as materials go, if you got a metal roof, that's the best. Definitely the most expensive, depending on how long you're going to live at a house. It may not be worth your money. You're talking way more expensive than shingle roof, like triple the money for
And heavy. Are
heavy. Older houses, you might have to do some resupporting on that, but usually not a big problem. And especially now they make aluminum roofs too, but metal roofs are usually going to go 40 to 50 years, and there's zero maintenance on them. You can now get shingles that are 40, 50-year lifetime shingles, but often they'll still break. Big windstorms can still damage those, even though it's less likely. Metal roof is basically zero maintenance almost for 40 years. So that is the best. But if you're going with shingles, there's two kinds of shingles. The old ones that people are probably more used to seeing 15 years ago were three tab. Those are the ones that look really flat. They're very uniform. Those break all the time in windstorms. I would highly recommend that no one puts those on their roof anymore. Architectural shingles are the newer grade that are more expensive than the old three tab, but they generally start at about a 25-year warranty. Sorry. And I usually get 25 or 20 to 25 years out of them. I rarely see them break in windstorms if they've been installed properly. They were designed to be a better shingle. They kind of have depth to them and overlap sideways and up and down. It's just a much better shingle that I would never go back to a three tab shingle if I was putting shingles on my roof.
what about those clay looking ones?
So there's clay shingles, clay tiles, and then there's metal roofs that look like clay.
Right.
Any metal roof, they mimic slate, they mimic clay. Those are all metal, so really it's just the look you're going for. Clay, I wouldn't recommend putting those on a house now.
They're also quite heavy.
They're really heavy, they're really expensive, they break. A lot of those you can't walk on. So for repairs and stuff, it makes it difficult.
But they last a heck of a long time.
They can, but the metal roofs last just as long. And you don't have all the deterioration and problems if they break. Um, it's a lot, maintenance would be a lot easier going with a metal roof that looks clay than going with a clay roof. I don't see I mean, to each their own if they really need that true clay look, but I'd go with a metal roof that looks like a clay roof.
What are you looking for in a chimney?
So it depends on the kind of chimney. You can have a metal chimney or a masonry chimney, but most houses have a masonry chimney. Any signs of cracking, they flake a lot. The crown, which is what is poured cement at the top of the chimney to protect all the brickwork below, that will often crack and start flaking off. If they don't have a proper drip edge, which is to make sure that water's dripping away from the chimney, then brickwork will flake significantly. A deteriorated liner can cause all that brick to start flaking prematurely as well, usually due to condensation issues because that hot, humid air from fires is getting into the brickwork. And then in the winter, you got cold air meeting hot, humid air, and that's just a good way to deteriorate just about anything with condensation.
I guess the other two more major things that cause problems on roofs are mostly skylights
Yeah.
and eaves troughs. Tell me about those two, because I know that those are things that you
Yeah,
find a
and,
lot of
and the problem
problems.
with skylights is the same with a lot of older chimneys. It's the flashing around them. Um, Chimneys, I will see, especially on old houses, moisture stains in the attic, and usually that's been fixed now. They often didn't put proper flashing around the chimneys to make sure, that's flashing is where a vertical surface meets a roof surface to prevent leakage around it. But yeah, skylights,
What are those made out of flashings?
usually, well, a number of different metals, but usually aluminum.
Aluminum.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then skylights, it's any protrusion through your roof, you're just creating more of a leak hazard. And the skylight's the same thing. If the flashing's not done properly or the window's really old and starting to deteriorate, then you're just kind of asking for moisture to get through the roof there. And with drainage, the eaves troughs, from below or above, looking for signs of sagging. Are the bracket nails that secure them in there, are they all backing out? Even if it's not sagging yet, the next time there's ice or water in there, it may start to sag. Are they fully clogged up? Older neighborhoods with huge trees, sometimes I'll see full on baby trees growing out of the eaves troughs, and then it's going to rip off from the house. It's not going to drain properly. If you got a lot of overflow, some people are like, oh, it's just overflowing. Well, that water is going to drain down somewhere, usually right next to the structure, or even with wind back onto your brickwork or whatever siding you've got there, and cause damage.
So then when you're walking around the house, okay, you can see some of the roof. Let's just say someone's walking around. They kind of know what to look for at that point.
And a big one too, black staining on the bottom of the eaves troughs indicates that they could be sagging and overflowing as well.
Black stains, do you
Yeah.
mean mold?
It's probably a little bit of mold or mildew that's starting to form there. But yeah, when you've got moisture for a long enough time, it starts turning black because it's mold spotting that started to stain that.
Tell me about, we were at an inspection, I think last month, and we were talking a lot about gardens that people had built in front of their home
Yeah,
and kind of like touching the
yeah,
foundation wall.
yeah. So like 99% of homes have a garden right up against the structure. It looks nice around your house. And I would say about 90% of those homes don't have a waterproofing membrane in between the garden and the structure. And the big problem with that is, the garden is all soil, which holds moisture. People water their gardens, so you're adding moisture to it as well. And a little bit of moisture against your foundation, a short period of time, does almost no damage usually. But when you have continual water and water pressure against your structure over the years, is what can cause the most damage in a home sometimes.
So you're kind of asking for trouble with that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where any size crack in a foundation is a potential leak hazard. If you have good enough drainage and water draining away from the structure, you can have a pretty big crack that won't leak. But if you're pooling water against the structure and you get that hydrostatic pressure against the foundation, then even a hairline crack can leak when you've got enough water pressure going into it.
Which kind of creates a problem when you have a finished basement, right? Because you can't
Oh
see
yeah,
it.
yep.
So in
Your first sign is usually going to be water staining or mold on your baseboard or floor or drywall.
I've had so many different clients walk through homes, and because this is not what they do every day, right? This is what you do every day.
Yep.
They'll see stains, right, on ceilings, on ceiling tiles, and immediately jump to conclusions. What are the different kind of stains? Like when you see a stain in a ceiling tile or a ceiling, what color means what, right? How do you kind of determine when you see something if it's a danger or not?
It can be tough to know without my tools sometimes. Because what I'm going to do if I see any stain that looks like a moisture stain, no matter the color, I'm going to scan it with my thermal camera and with my moisture meter.
Okay, tell me about those.
So we've got both of those right here. So thermal camera here, this is an incredibly useful tool for home inspectors nowadays. Now, I was saying if there's a moisture stain, I'm going to scan it. This can't tell me if something's wet or not, but it can tell me if it's hot or cold. And almost every surface that is wet is going to be cooler than the surrounding surfaces because of evaporation. It's going to be slightly cooler. So this is very good at giving me clues. I can scan an entire ceiling in a matter of 2 seconds. And okay, there's a cold spot that looks like a water pooling there. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take my moisture meter and I'm going to scan it to see the percentage of relative moisture in there.
How accurate are these?
Uh, Pretty darn accurate. As long as it's working as it's intended to, like, put that on there. It's 100% moisture right there. And this is measuring 3/4 of an inch into my skin. So it's the blood that's running through me is showing that. Almost every surface will have some sort of moisture in it. So, if I test drywall and it's got 2% moisture, that's pretty normal. Everything has some sort of moisture level in it. But at a certain point, if I'm at like 25% moisture in a stained ceiling, that's telling me, through experience that there's something going on here. This is either a wet now or has been wet recently. 100% moisture means there's water pouring on there like right now. So with colored stains, it can be difficult, something that's turned brown. There's a pretty distinct brown color that
It's like brownish yellow.
yeah, and the darker brown, it usually means it's pretty old. An older stain, I think the water has and sediments have kind of oxidized in there and it turns it brown. If it's pretty transparent, it's usually newer. And if it's black, then you're looking at mold staining. It could be dry, it could be wet. I'm going to recommend you get further investigation on anything with mold on it, no matter what. Because quite often we can't see the other side of that drywall to know if there's an ongoing issue or not.
A lot of people think of you guys as kind of like all knowing, all seeing kind of
Def
people.
Definitely not. And that's where I feel like I let people down sometimes in a way where I'm like, unfortunately, all I can do for this, I looked at it, there's a moisture stain. I can't tell how old it is. It's dry right now. There's, I could say maybe it's on the first floor. We ran all the plumbing fixtures for 5 minutes above, and there's no signs of moisture right now. This may change when somebody uses a fixture differently. Maybe it was a roof leak that came down a wall and ran in 10 years ago. All I can do in my report is to say, I'll take a picture of it, document it, say it was dry at the time of inspection. You're going to have to monitor this area. That's kind of the best we can do sometimes because, when things are dry, it's a little more difficult to figure out what happened. If something's wet, my tools will usually lead me right back to exactly where it's coming from.
Right. So you kind of have to explain to clients, right, when you meet them, what your, I think the legal term is limitations are, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that exactly what
Yeah, that's one of the things that on the driveway talk we have is there's always going to be limitations. There's usually a room in the house, the garage most commonly, that's stacked full of storage items. I can't see the wall behind there. I'm going to do my best to look all around it, but it's not feasible for us to move all these heavy items. Take 2 hours to clean out the garage. There's going to be limitations, and that's something as well. We don't do invasive investigation. I can't cut a hole in the wall like Mike Holmes does. We're not ripping insulation out of walls to see what's behind there. It might be, if it's easy enough to take a peek, we might do that. But I've had clients where, oh, we found mold behind the insulation. You didn't check that. And I'm like, well, it was, if I start pulling the insulation out, I'm probably not going to be able to get it back in properly. And now you don't own the home yet. So we have to be careful with what we do. We can't damage the homeowner's property to try and get a better look at something. As much as I'd love to break open that wall and see what's behind it, we just can't do that because of liability.
So you've checked the outside. Let's say you're kind of moving in now. I've seen you often just kind of check out door handles and hinges and things like that. That's kind of obvious. That's kind of something that anybody can just kind of, do themselves. But
Yeah.
there are a lot of things that inside you're able to see that I can't see. And I've seen you do this so many times, and you'll still kind of look at things with a different eye, even though I've watched you do this 1,000 times.
Yeah. Um,
What are those
and it's
things?
kind of funny. One thing with the door handles that a lot of people don't understand, if there's a door handle that's not working, most of the time we don't care too much about that. I'll be checking the door handles more so for structural issues.
Explain.
That's one of the most common areas that a structural issue will show up is at the top of a door frame. So if the door's not closing, it could just be a broken hinge. It could be that the door frame has sagged and is slanted now because there was structural movement in the house.
Oh,
So one of the bigger things that I'm actually looking for when I check a door and open and close it is it hitting the frame? Is there slanting in the door frame? It's an easy clue that I might have to look somewhere else for structural movement.
wow. I never knew that.
Yeah.
And what are the other kind of parts of um, structural issues that you can kind of have clues towards that other people are not trained to see?
Yeah, so that's one of the big ones where most structural components, especially if it's a finished basement, are concealed during the inspection. So that's where when I'm going through the home, door frames, window frames, any bulkheads where there might be a joist or a beam running through the house. If it's an old house and I'm like, I know this was an enclosed kitchen and living room when it was built and now it's wide open. Is there any cracking in the ceiling, or if there's a bulkhead there, does it look like it's sagging? Have they made repairs to any of these areas? Um, and one of the things is like I'll be paying attention. Does this paint look old? If the paint is fresh, they can easily cover up clues for structural issues. They might have just drywalled and painted the door corners, and I won't be able to tell. If the paint looks like it's 5 or 10 years old and there's no new cracking in it, then I know the structure hasn't moved in 5 or 10 years.
Interesting. So you're also kind of looking for anything that could be concealing
Yeah, there's a
something.
lot of my one of my comments that I use all the time is there were no underlying conditions identified during the inspection in whatever area. So that one for the structure, I couldn't see the structure, but I didn't see any underlying concerns that might indicate there's a structural issue. So that's
Interesting.
something for sure. When you're going through a house, taking a flashlight is a great idea, and check out all the door corners, bulkheads, anywhere there's a large span in the house. Just look for signs of cracking.
How do you tell the difference between, let's say, a settling crack and structural cracking?
Those are tough because they can be the same thing. That's where there's a lot of components you take into consideration. If the house is 30 years old and there's a tiny crack at the top of a door frame, I'm not going to be concerned about that because the house finished settling decades ago. If the house is 2 years old and there's a crack that's still there, I'd say, this might be a normal settlement crack. You're gonna have to keep an eye on this for the next couple of years to make sure it doesn't continue to expand. But generally, within a few years after the house is built, the house is finished settling into the ground, and those cracks aren't going to continue to show up. But a settlement crack can look the same as a shrinkage crack at a door frame too, especially when the house is newer. Your drywall, your wood, all the concrete in the house, it usually takes up to 3 years for all those materials to finish drying out. So that's part of the natural curing process of a home is drying out, and there's almost always going to be a few shrinkage and settlement cracks.
Speaking of which, I wanted to ask you about new homes, and new homes versus old homes. Obviously, there's the old saying that they don't build them like they used to, right? And when you're shopping for a home in Toronto or the GTA, you're really looking at different pockets that will have different aged homes that span decades apart.
Yeah.
What are the differences in the way they used to build homes? And does it matter if, because obviously it takes years to build homes. They'll be built at some points when it's really wet outside. Does that matter? Right? Like what are the different ways in which homes have been built over the years where you've kind of noticed, hey, homes built in this particular decade are usually an issue. These particular decades were pretty good.
Yeah. So to start off, if you're buying a home basically 80s and newer, uh, the building code is way better than before. So you're gonna have there's just certain things like you're gonna have copper or PEX plumbing and plastic drainage piping. You're gonna have grounded copper electrical wiring in the house. Um, those types of things were brought in the 80s for the building code, and I know when I walk in what types of wiring and stuff I'm going to find. So I know I'm not going to find any ungrounded wiring, which I'd find in the 60s and earlier. No knob and tube wiring in those homes. I'm not going to find galvanized steel plumbing pipes like you would in earlier grades. So yeah, I find the 80s are the sweet spot because the 70s they changed a lot of building code. They tried to make homes a lot more efficient and sealed off, whereas before that homes were pretty breezy. Like windows and doors weren't nearly as well sealed. There wasn't nearly as much insulation. The problem with 70s homes is they started sealing them off, but they didn't take into account for all the condensation and mold issues you can create when you do that. Houses need to breathe. Not at your doors and windows, but the attic space in a 70s home there's about a 50% chance it's going to be heavily mold covered. So that's what mold in the attic and then aluminum wiring in a 70s home as well. The price of copper skyrocketed, I think, in the late 60s. So builders switched over to aluminum wiring. And aluminum wire in itself, when a house has only aluminum, there's no problems with that. The problem was when the price came back down and builders switched back to copper, people started mixing these two in the home and they expand at different rates when they're being used. So when they expand and contract, you get wires that separate and you get arcing, which is when electricity is trying to jump to a wire that's close by. So when you have a copper only receptacle connected to aluminum wire, those connections will usually come loose at some point in time and start arcing, and that's why homes burned down a lot in the 70s from aluminum wire. Now there's great ways. You don't have to freak out if you have a home with aluminum wire. If it's been properly updated by an electrician, then it can be perfectly safe. But it's when what the problem with it is now is people will, and I've seen at my dad's house, actually, the painter came and said, "Oh, I can replace all the receptacles for you when I paint the house. It'll look a lot nicer and cleaner." And he's like, "Okay, no problem." And then his fuses all started tripping. And I'm like, "Well, did you have any electrical work done?" He said, "No, my painter replaced the receptacles." And painter went out, bought a 30 pack of copper only receptacles and put them right on the aluminum wire in my dad's house. So he just made 30 new fire hazards in the house. Where an electrician, what they do is they make a safe connection from the aluminum coming out of the wall to a copper wire called a pigtail. And then you can get today's types of receptacles that are copper only, and it's safe to make those replacements.
Is it expensive to do that? Like, let's say you found a great deal on a home that's got aluminum wiring, and you're just kind of budgeting. Is it safely
Um,
within budget reasonably to?
I mean, yeah, it depends on the buyer, but yeah, like $5,000 to $10,000 and that would probably include panel replacement too.
And you could do the whole home, everything.
It would depend on the size, but yeah, I mean, I've really only done a full reno myself once on aluminum, and the electrician charged us, I think, 6 grand, and that was all the receptacles, light switches, light fixtures, and a panel replacement.
Wow, that's not
It
as
was
bad as I thought
somewhere
it would
just
be.
over 6 grand. So,
Not that bad.
a bigger home, and this was a 3-bed bungalow, basement and top floor, but you could be double that in a bigger home. But it's not something usually that you'd like, if you negotiate it, you'll probably be okay. Depends if you're depends how tight your budget is, right?
I think one thing that I see a lot in, especially in Richmond Hill, which is where I'm located, is multi-generational homes, right? Where you have more than one generation living in the home at the same time. And of course, that kind of translates really well into basement apartments. Most of them not being legal, but you know, let's say what I think what the term is called conforming, not non-legal but conforming or
I,
something like that.
I don't think I've ever fully learned the difference in all those types of the lingo on that, legal non-conforming and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's not legal conforming or I don't know. Anyways, point being, most of these basement apartments are not legal. And what are the biggest things that you see in these basement apartments when you're doing these inspections that you would say are like kind of like the common issues?
As in like a giveaway that they're not legal, or
No, just in terms of people renovating a basement and not doing things correctly.
oh, well, I mean, if they didn't take out a permit, it's pretty quick to me. I can usually figure out if they've taken out a permit or not. One is GFCI switches on the receptacles near water. So if you're not familiar with what that is, the receptacles with a test reset button, that's to protect against ground faults. So you'll see them in the bathroom, the kitchen, laundry, outside. If the basement bathroom doesn't have one of those, then they didn't use an electrician to do their wiring down there. It was just a general contractor, and that's probably 80% of the time. That's it's the contractor does it, not the electrician. And then plumbing as well. I'll see S traps. So your trap below every sink is this one I won't fully explain, but it should be a P trap, which loops and then goes into the vent in the drain. An S trap loops twice and then goes directly down into the drain, and that causes a number of different plumbing issues. I see those two things all the time, and it's just a dead giveaway they didn't hire a plumber or an electrician to do it. It was a general contractor who's not familiar with building code who did those installations.
And is that something that can create a bit of a smell in that house?
S trap, because the air pressure needs to go up as water goes down to drain. Sometimes it can siphon that water trap, and that water trap's there to stop sewer gas from coming into the living space. So that's one of the issues with an S trap. And then the GFCI, that's a shock hazard if you don't have those properly protected near water.
And is what would you say is the biggest kind of misconception about things that would scare people that have been kind of one of those major, cliffhanger moments from HGTV when you're looking at those home renovation shows, things like asbestos, black mold, What are the misconceptions around those things that people are unaware of?
Asbestos is, for the most part, completely safe to live within your home as long as you're not doing any major renovations that contain those materials. So that's kind of a bit of a complicated one to explain to clients. Where if you have old stucco ceiling from the 60s, a lot of those will have asbestos in them. If you're going to leave that, there's zero hazard as long as it's not, as long as you don't have water coming in and it's all flaking or anything like that. When asbestos materials are flaking, it's called being friable, and you breathe in those microparticles, and that's how people get sick. So if you're not planning any renovations with those materials, then it's a zero health concern, really. I don't know of any documentation of someone living in a house with asbestos that, if everything was in good condition, that they ever got sick. Now, where you can run into problems if you have a material like, uh, well, say you had asbestos in your plaster ceiling, and you do want to do a renovation that includes that. I don't know, you're going to vault your ceilings or something. Um, a professional contractor will not be able to work on that until they've had it tested to determine if it contains asbestos. They're legally they can get sued for a lot of money if they have their workers working in an environment that has asbestos in it. So that's where you start looking at more issues. And a contractor that does insulation, if there's vermiculite insulation in the attic, that could have asbestos in it. It needs to be tested to find out if it does or not. They may not go up there and increase your insulation for you if they determine that that has asbestos in it. Um, you need environmental companies to remove these materials if they do have asbestos.
And that starts to get to be a problem if let's say, squirrels or raccoons that kind of come into the
Yeah,
attic.
exactly. That's when those things can be more of an issue. But yeah, if you have vermiculite insulation that has asbestos in it and it's in your attic undisturbed, there's no health concerns with that.
Interesting. So let's say you're going through a house, you're looking at all these components. What's that next step for you when you're inside, like running through your checklist?
Um, you mean like when I'm going through what I'm going to do next after I'm done the outside, I start in the attic. I always go from the top down. Inspectors all have different ways of doing it, but I like to go from the top down because I'm going to be running all the plumbing fixtures, and water drains downwards. So if there's any leaks, I'm going to find it as I go down to the next floors. So after I've gone outside and I've checked the roof already, then I can go into the attic and check the roof structure, look for signs of leakage, condensation, mold, animals that might have been living up there, the insulation and the ventilation to make sure all those systems are working properly up there. Then I work my way down through the home. I'll basically do a full lap around every room, around the entire floor. And if you've been with me enough, I always start at the ceiling and then work my way down and around every room. One thing, and again, I don't know if it would look weird going through a home. This is my most valuable tool here, flashlight. People think I'm crazy. It's a $150 flashlight. But this thing, it's a thousand lumens. I've had this for 5 years. It's got a 7-year warranty, and I've never had to replace it. I used to replace my flashlights every probably a couple of months, the $50 flashlights. But what I can do with this, if you flash a flashlight straight at a wall, you might see a stain or something. It doesn't tell you much, but when you graze a surface, it pulls out any imperfection in that surface. And I'm not looking for little imperfections, but there might be maybe that ceiling's bowed, or maybe there's a big repair patch you couldn't see from the natural daylight. Then I can further investigate those areas. And the grazing an LED flashlight on ceilings and walls is a great way to see if there's been any issues with those walls.
And how do you test uh, outlets?
We got that around here too. So this is a great tool, especially for real estate agents, but a home buyer as well.
What is it?
So this is a receptacle tester. This one has a GFCI tester as well. All of these have a legend on here, and you don't so much need to know exactly what all of these mean, though you could look them up if you find any. The two yellow lights, that's telling you it's been properly wired and has a ground. So anywhere after the 80s will pretty much should all have just yellow lights. But I see all the times, somebody's replaced their outlets and they put the hot and the neutral in backwards. And that's a safety hazard. And, a lot of people will plug in a lamp after they've done renovations. And if it turns on, they figure things have been wired correctly, but that's not the case at all. Back to homes built in the 60s and earlier, they had ungrounded wiring. This would tell me if it's got that. There's a lot of different things on here, like an open neutral. You'd have to take a look at it, but basically, sticking this, especially if you're in a home built prior to the 70s, these are great for telling you if you're going to have some bigger electrical renovations. Open grounds or ungrounded wiring, and most homes in the 60s were built with ungrounded wiring, so this will tell you if you've got that to look forward to after you purchase the house as well.
So funny because, these are things that we never really think about. And when we're going to see homes, usually we have a tight schedule. Usually my clients have kids and we're trying to move through things pretty quickly. Um, and scheduling becomes a bit of an issue. So we can't always look at these things. And then when you come in and you actually are able to go through it with a fine tooth comb with all these gadgets, I find it always interesting that um, the way in which people try to conceal, or their contractors conceal from the actual owners to try to save a buck
Yeah.
on the actual renovation and put more in their pocket, becomes a lot more apparent how often that does actually happen, how few contractors actually know what they're doing.
Yeah, I would say few, but it's yeah, there's enough out there that's kind of frightening on how often. Like I always say, with YouTube these days, it's crazy some of the things that contractors will do or homeowners will do with renovations without watching even a basic 3-minute video on how to wire something or how to plumb something. Just making up their own whatever they thought is how you should plumb a sink or something like that. It's kind of amazing. But yeah, for an experienced home inspector, and that's something that, you know, with a chat here, we can't teach you all the tricks that we know. You need experience in a lot of things. And I was actually thinking on the way here when you told me kind of what we were going to be talking about, some of the things you just, after enough time in the industry, you get that spidey sense for, right? I'm sure you guys have it kind of in a different way as a real estate agent. But yeah, there's homes where there's just a lot of things, and there's silly little things that I know from inspecting enough homes. If I go in the bathroom and there's a brand new what do you call it, a bathtub that's a standalone bathtub, and it hasn't been secured to the ground, 99% of the time I'm going to find 10 other plumbing issues. It's just the person either didn't think the tub should be secured or didn't take the time to do it. They're just not going to do the other plumbing things properly. It usually wasn't a licensed plumber who did the plumbing. And if you have a big tub like that that's not secured, well, what's holding it in place is a 2.5-inch piece of plastic, the drain pipe. And that's usually going to crack over time.
So it doesn't take much to actually secure the tub. They should just do it.
No, and some tubs actually aren't designed to be secured, but they should be no matter what, because some of them just have legs. If it's a heavy cast iron tub like the old school ones used to be, that's okay. That's heavy enough. Someone bumping their leg into it isn't going to move it. The problem with all the fiberglass tubs and stuff like that now, any light bump, and I see, the whole thing moves a couple inches sometimes when someone bumps their leg into it. When you're getting into and out of that tub, you're usually sitting on the ledge and the whole thing moves. And it's very common. If the tub moves, I'll see leak stains or see moisture coming down.
Well, that's also kind of how they're building things right now in terms of fixtures, right? Like I also see a lot of, in fact, in my condo, I have a floating vanity, for example. And that was something that when I had you come and inspect the condo when I was buying it, is right away you were saying, this is a floating vanity. It looks nice. However, you just started shaking it and you're like, look at that, right?
Yeah.
It's not secured.
And that's a common one that's not going to be secured properly. And I don't even know if it wasn't originally secured properly. It's just over time. It's not a great way of designing something but it's always putting weight on on its connections. And then people, you really shouldn't be leaning on a vanity that's wall mounted like that, but people are going to do it. And most people, how do they know if it's in there? It looks sturdy. You should be able to lean on something like that. But yeah, things like that are very common. Yeah, floating shelves, floating vanities, and stuff like that. It's just tough to secure those properly, and especially if a homeowner did the reno or an inexperienced contractor, they're not going to secure that properly to the wall.
There is something that I've often heard realtors say, which is, well, I mean, I always recommend getting an inspection no matter what, but I've heard some realtors say, well, it's a condo, you don't need an inspection, right? Where I understand if you're saying it's a condo, you don't own that much, right? Comparatively to a home, you
Yep.
don't own the windows, the roof, none of that stuff you're responsible for,
Yep.
right? Can there still be issues? Of course there can. But it's not to the same level. I understand saying something like that and explaining that, right? When it's a really hot market and you need to do something to elbow your way up to the front of the line. Fine, it
Yep.
happens. Not saying it's a good thing, but what would you say are things that people just don't know about condos and they're trying to buy a condo and they're being discouraged from getting an inspection done?
So, I mean, the biggest thing, in my opinion, is liability in a condo. Um, Plumbing leaks all the time. And when you're in a condo, if you're on the 20th floor, how much damage can you do with your bathtub leaking? Or your the dishwasher and washing machines are the two most common leak hazards in condos.
But isn't it that the insurance of the unit owners below pay for the damage from the leak above?
Uh, I wasn't under that impression. I would have thought that your insurance company would be responsible for the damage that you did.
I have to ask my sister about that. She's my insurance
Yeah,
broker.
that I don't know.
Okay.
But I would you want to get into it and find out?
No, of course not.
Probably not. And then there's the fact that okay, so the outside, you're not responsible for that, but what if you're on the penthouse and the roof leaks? Would you want to know about that? Probably. If I'm on the balcony and all the windows have, the caulking's all cracked or looks like there's bricks that are flaking and there's leak hazards that are probably going to cause damage inside, you probably want to know about that too. I say that when I'm inspecting like condo townhomes. Usually the roof is the condo's responsibility. But very often, if that roof is leaking, do you want, even though it's the condo's responsibility to fix, you probably want to know it's going to cause water damage inside your house.
Now, there is one thing that has been a problem in plumbing with condos, and most people have no idea what Kitek or Kitech, I forget.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Kitech, is that how it's
That's how
pronounced?
I say it. Kitech. Yeah.
Okay. Explain to people what Kitech is.
Yeah, so this is big in condos. There's tons of condos. It was between 1995 and 2007 that it was being installed. It's a type of plumbing that looks like, well, it's plastic, but has some brass fittings that would corrode, sometimes bubble and burst. And there's a class action lawsuit against IPEX, who's the manufacturer of Kitech. So a lot of condos, people will have us in, especially if it's in that range and they want to know if there's Kitech, because you need to know the names. There's Kitech is the most common brand name, but there's about 15 others that it was manufactured other that are considered Kitech brands. So you got to know what you're looking for. There's certain colors that are usually a giveaway of the type.
Orange,
Yeah, orange and
red,
blue.
blue.
But it did come in any color. I've seen it in pretty much all colors. So you want to know for sure if that's still in your apartment. A lot of condos will require the unit owner to replace that at their own expense.
Yeah, so the thing that I see a lot with that is it's usually in the status certificate
Yeah.
where the condo already knows that there is Kitech and they know that they need to replace it, and then they'll put in a special assessment for everybody and say, hey, look, we got a team of plumbers coming in and they're going to tear up everybody's walls, and everybody's going to be responsible for paying 5,000 or whatever it is,
Yep.
for this whole job to be done. And it is definitely one of those special assessments that you kind of bite your nails over because it's expensive, right? And it's also invasive and time consuming and just
Yep.
really annoying to live through. So when you're looking under a sink, is there a particular thing that you're looking for to spot that more than just the color? Will it just say Kitech right on it?
Yeah. So if you can read, and the problem is a lot of the times you can't see enough of the pipe to read the markings on it. But usually somewhere in the home you can, by the toilet, the bathroom sink, kitchen sink. I'm looking anywhere I can to find out what that brand name is. And if it's one of the more uncommon ones, I've got a list of all of them that I'll verify that against. But I mean, a homeowner can look that up online as well. Even if you're just looking at a home, you can take a picture on your camera and then go home and look up the Kitech class action lawsuit brand names and see afterwards, even if you can't figure it out while you're at the home.
And this wasn't done in detached homes?
It is in some. Yeah, there's some pockets in Markham that have had it. It's just more prevalent in condos. I don't know why. But yeah, there's definitely detached homes, townhomes. I've seen it in quite a few times. So it's really good to, yeah, you want to have an inspector come in who's familiar with it and looking for it. Um, Part of the problem is all we can see is what's coming out of the walls. We also know, the areas in like the furnace room and stuff to check to see if it has all been replaced because I've had only once ever. Um, I don't know, I've probably done 50 inspections that involve Kitech and Kitech replacements, but one, it looked like they tried to cover it up. I don't think it was missed. They basically cut the pipe and made a connection as close as they could to the walls and didn't do the stuff that's buried in the wall. But
Wow.
that is a limitation, most of the time. And I think I found that with my boroscope, which is a camera with you can basically on a, I don't know what you call it, a metal lead that you can bend around corners in
Do
a
you have that?
wall.
Do you have that here?
I don't have that here today, no.
Oh.
But yeah, it's a little light in a camera that it's about a 3 foot extension that you can bend into a wall and see what's inside the wall. Um,
Hmm.
Sometimes you can see what's in there. And
What other gadgets do you have that you'd say are pretty useful that you
the ones I showed you are really the most. I mean, funny enough, and this is going to be useless to your viewers here, but an electric screwdriver saves me more time than anything on the inspection. When I'm taking off an electrical panel, instead of doing all that by hand, which might take you half an hour, it takes me a minute or two. Actually, a funny one that people could take with them. This one here is just a magnet. And this can help you identify different types of pipes in a home. So if you're in a home, again, built 50s and newer, I don't think there was galvanized in the 60s, maybe. 60s or newer for sure. Um, Insurance companies will not want any galvanized plumbing in your home with galvanized steel. If this sticks to it, then you know it's a type of steel. Copper won't stick to it. Plastic won't stick to it, obviously. So one of the good spots, if you see the electrical or not the water meter in the home, testing below the water meter to where it goes into the ground, if that's galvanized piping or not, can be a red flag on a pretty big renovation you might need to do. Um, Insurance companies will want you to replace the service coming in, and a lot of people think everything up to your water meter is the water company's responsibility, but it's your responsibility all the way up to where the property line is
Oh wow.
to replace. So galvanized piping corrodes from the inside out with no exterior warning quite often, and then bursts. So insurance companies don't like it for that reason. It can flood your basement. So you'd be responsible, it could be 10 feet, it could be 50 feet out to your property line
Wow.
and the big cost on that is the excavation because you're gonna have to dig up your yard to access that.
Wow, that's thousands of dollars.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a pretty good tool for seeing if you got any galvanized piping. Just a magnet.
When you're looking through a basement and you see the joists, they have been there are so many different ways that they've built joists and bracings. What are the different kinds that people say? Because I know that in the newer homes, they've become more efficient with the joists and bracing and things like that.
Yeah.
And it kind of looks flimsier, even though I know it works.
Yeah.
Uh, what's the deal with that?
So the engineered joist that you're talking about, yeah, if you're unfamiliar and you're used to seeing dimensional lumber like solid wood, you see an engineered joist. It's basically a thin sheet of OSB plywood vertically that's supporting it, but it's been engineered to specifications that can actually span a lot longer distance than the same depth of dimensional lumber, and it's a lot lighter.
So it's better.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I'm unaware of what would make it worse. It might burn a little faster, but dimensional lumber is going to burn pretty fast too. It's wood, so
And then
um,
there's also X bracing that I've seen a
yeah,
lot.
that's another type of engineered. Looking up the differences in that, I don't think there's a terrible difference. Those are also engineered. It uses less wood, but also good and can span much longer distances than traditional dimensional lumber.
I've had clients who had built their own home or at least had a hand in building their own home who would tell me about the type, how they put extra wide um, joists or all kinds of different lumber that they've just kind of added and done, uh, a better job with the structural part of their home because they have, you know, wider or thicker pieces of wood kind of in the structure of the home.
Yeah.
But I was under the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that that doesn't really matter that much.
Um, I mean, that would depend a lot on when the home was built. Um,
I'm talking about homes built in the 90s.
If it was built in the 90s, all the structures in there should have been engineered. Standards today are a lot more sturdy than they were then. Yeah, 90s, you'd have a lot flimsier homes than built now. Um, but like that's a hard one to really answer. Engineers over engineer everything. So if you did a new addition to your house, going above and beyond what an engineer recommended, I think is kind of useless.
Mm.
Um, yeah, things are nowadays. If things have been engineered, and you had a structural contractor who worked with a structural engineer to build the structure, that's all you need. Um, Putting some whopping thing in there bigger than an engineer recommended, I don't think would have any benefit to it.
We had a big, huge rainstorm recently in Toronto,
Yeah.
and we had a lot of flooding. What can you say that would kind of give people a bit of just advice to help them stay away from problems like that? Because I feel like there are so many people who don't maintain their sump pumps properly. What do you look for in that? Are not keeping, or I guess not doing anything to help support grading around their home where it's kind of, all facing inwards towards the home.
Yep.
Things like that. What can people do to kind of help themselves in those scenarios?
Yeah, so I always say water in a short term causes almost no damage. Over the long term, it can cause a ton of damage. And your downspouts are one thing. Making sure those are extended like 4 to 6 feet away from the house. And I know it would have been a lot of groundwater with the flooding, but how much water was going on top of your house when it's raining that much as well? And so many people just have their downspouts draining right near their structure, and that's all pooling around there. Yeah, the grading within at least 6 feet of your house should all slightly slope away. That's huge too. And some people are in a neighborhood where there's a massive hill that comes right at their house. It's not feasible to have it all sloping away. Usually, and these aren't cheap fixes, but a waterproofing membrane on the outside of your foundation is often required. As well as, even if everything's sloping towards the back of your house like this, you can then have it graded so it's going to the sides of the house and not just all of that water building up on the backside of your house. But what you were saying with sump pumps, yeah, I see like 25-year-old sump pumps that people are like, oh, it still works. And I'm like, well, okay, it triggered on here, but this thing is gunked up, it's rusted. Um, when this thing's running hard for 10 hours during the next flooding, that's not when you want it to conk out. Most people wait way too long to replace things like a sump pump just because they don't see it as a useful item. They're not interacting with it like they are with their AC and their furnace and stuff. It kind of does its own thing, but it's an extremely important item. And most people never have their drainage tiles and their sewers scoped as well.
What, first of all, tell me what that is, and also explain to people what a sump. Most people don't even know what a sump pump is.
Okay, so a sump pump is basically a basin that you'll find in your basement, and it has drainage tiles, which is basically a perforated pipe running around your foundation to collect stormwater, groundwater and stormwater, to make sure that your basement isn't going to flood. And if there's water that's been pooling around your structure, it will inevitably happen most of the time, that it is going into these perforated pipes, collects in your sump pump, and then there's a pump or sump pit, and then there's a pump in your pit that pumps that water away from the home. So
Okay.
basically, you're keeping water from pooling in and around your structure.
Sorry, I interrupted you. What was the next thing you were saying about those tiles?
I think I said it all there.
Okay. Okay. The perforated.
Yeah, the
Um,
perforated tiles, and there's tons of homes in Toronto that don't have them. And it really depends where you are if you truly need one. There's a lot more and more municipalities are requiring them on every home now. If you live near a lake, almost always they're going to require that. Like I live up at the top of a hill in Keswick, and um, my home has one, which I like to have, but it never goes off. Everything drains away from my house, but everywhere in Keswick has any new build will have a sump pump now. Realistically, I think every home in Ontario should have one moving forward. There's just so many houses now that people are like, "Oh, I'm not near a lake or anything." I'm like, you don't realize that your home was built on an old marsh, and the groundwater is right up to the bottom of your foundation, and that drainage tile is going to be collecting any water that rises up and pumping it away from the house instead of causing structural issues and flood hazards.
People also, I guess, if I'm showing homes and there's an unfinished basement, people get really scared when they see cracks in the the basement walls and things like that.
Yep.
Talk to me about those because I know that with things like epoxy sealing and stuff like that, or epoxy filling, I should rather say, those things are not so new, but relatively just unknown.
Yeah, so like almost every home is going to have at least a couple cracks in the foundation. Um, Homes from sometime in the 70s onward will almost always be poured concrete foundations. And it's pretty easy repairs for any crack that leaks now. I mean, if your basement's finished, then you got to open up the drywall. If it's an unfinished basement, you get a contractor in to do an epoxy injection. And most professional contractors will give you a 10-year or a lifetime warranty on those crack seals.
What are epoxy injections?
So the contractor will, and I'm not an expert at this, but generally they'll drill holes along the crack, they'll wash it out, and then they put epoxy in there that fills up the entire crack, so that you never have a leak hazard again. And it's much cheaper than old fixes were always from the outside. You'd have to excavate the outside, waterproof and seal from the outside. This injection method seals that whole crack anyway, so you don't need to access the outside of the
And
crack.
the epoxy expands and contracts with the house over the
Yeah,
facility.
epoxy is kind of a semi-rigid material. It's a great innovation in building materials. There's waterproofing cement, which people used to seal up cracks with and still do for some parts. But
Yeah, they like
cement
kind of
is
parge it.
cement is so rigid that with our winters, with all the expansion and contraction, they'll inevitably crack open at some point in time again. If you use like a caulking, like a window caulking, it's just too soft. It will deteriorate and animals can chew through that sort of stuff. So epoxy has this slight give to it, so it will move with the house, but doesn't crack, and animals aren't chewing through it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a great material for waterproofing foundations and things like that. But if you get into older homes, it's not as easy. Most of them are block or in Toronto, a lot of brick foundations. Those quite often you will have to excavate and waterproof from the outside. Though you can do waterproofing from the inside as well. It's not as good because waterproofing from the inside, what you're doing is allowing water through your structure, and then it catches the water inside the wall and takes that into a drainage system to a sump pump. So that you're not going to flood your basement. You'll have a dry basement, but your foundation really can still deteriorate over time.
Interesting. Yeah, I've really started to love the innovations in building that I've been seeing over the last few years, especially because they really have been innovating. And one thing that I just love watching, it's just, one of those kind of like an ASMR thing, but just really satisfying to watch is spray foam insulation.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
when
See those?
it looks so cool,
Yeah.
right? That's tell me about that and what the differences are between different kinds of insulation.
So spray foam basically it's well, one, it's an insulator and a vapor barrier in one. If you use closed cell, then that's the kind that you're talking about. The kind you can get at a can is open cell spray foam. That's good for helping insulate around walls and stuff, but not something you want to insulate your basement with, for instance. The closed cell is a lot more expensive, should be professionally installed. That stuff, you basically get the most bang for your buck in a small space um, for insulation value. So you can insulate the best in a small space. So for things like basement walls and vaulted ceilings, I don't think there's anything better than spray foam insulation. If you go down to like fiberglass, you're just limited to how much space you have on that. I mean, you're always limited to the space, but uh, animals love insulation as well, fiberglass insulation as well. So mice, I always say in the attic, if I go to inspect a fiberglass attic, 95% of the time, if the home's 10 years or older, there's signs of mice in there. Basically, mice love to dig through fiberglass insulation. Once they're through it, it makes a perfect tunnel. They can make burrows in there. What a lot of builders are using in Ontario now is cellulose fiber insulation. It's basically a mulched up newspaper that's coated in a fire retardant chemical. And it's considered a rodent deterrent. I believe it's too dusty. Once mice or animals start to dig in that, they can't breathe in it, so they won't actually burrow into it. With that insulation, sometimes I'll see some pathways, one or two pathways across the top that a mouse kind of was on his way through, but rarely do I ever see them burrowing into cellulose fiber.
Interesting. And with insulating basements, I noticed that some basements will have insulation go right down to close to the floor and some only halfway down. What's the difference between those? What do you prefer seeing?
That was just era of building code. Floor to ceilings required now in all new builds. The biggest problem with that is the vapor barrier on it. I get calls from people all the time thinking their foundation's leaking. They think they have cracks everywhere when the floor to ceiling, the problem with that is, so in the first couple of years, your foundation, when it's curing, needs to dry out. Um, and you put the vapor barrier on the inside. Now, all that humidity is trapped in between the foundation wall and the vapor barrier. Because the vapor barrier is there to stop humidity condensation transfer, moisture transfer between the wall. So it will catch, and then when it hits the metal strap that's keeping the insulation on the wall, the strap is cold, it turns into just water. And sometimes there's a whole puddle of water in the bottom of the insulation. You can see condensation all over the insulation, and it will sometimes just leak onto the floor. So really the best thing that I've seen to do is while your foundation is drying out is to cut slits into all the way along your vapor barrier until the foundation's fully dried out, run a dehumidifier, and then tape them back up. I think it's a part of the building code that needs work, I guess, because I see it everywhere. And I've had contractors, oh, I did this to code. And I'm like, I'm not saying you didn't do it to code, but obviously you can't argue that there's just water pouring onto the floor and pooling around their vapor barrier here. And you obviously don't want that in the house.
I guess with all your extensive knowledge of building codes and the history of buildings in this area in particular in York region in Toronto, um, what is one change you think that should be made to the building code?
I think something's got to be done about that, the vapor barriers. Um, I'm not sure what the thing is there because after the foundation's dried out, it's nice to have that vapor barrier where it is. Maybe it'll be a building science thing where they can come up with a different way of allowing that foundation to dry out. The building code, I think, is pretty good these days. It's funny, one thing I was saying that the other day that I think will change, and this is more fire and safety code, is right now carbon monoxide detectors are only required in a hallway outside the bedrooms. So most two-story homes, they're only required on the second floor. And I always say carbon monoxide is a heavier gas that will slowly fill up your house from the basement. And most carbon monoxide issues start with the combustible appliances the combustion appliances in the basement, like your water heater, your furnace, and so on. So I always say, I always recommend put a carbon monoxide detector on every floor of your home. Do you really want to wait until your entire home is filled up with carbon monoxide until that goes off while you're sleeping? Probably not. You'd rather have it go off when there's carbon monoxide in the basement. So right now it's only code to have on that outside the bedrooms, but I think that'll probably change at some point in time to have at least one in the basement, if not on every floor of the home.
That's like the most scary out of all the things that can happen. I think that that one's the scariest one because it's a kind of a silent killer.
Yeah, and I think that's why the code it kills people usually when they're asleep. So that's why it's required at the bedrooms. But like I say, would you not want more advanced knowledge than I'm sleeping and it's going off? There's carbon monoxide right outside my door right now. You'd probably say, yeah, I'd rather have one on
Right.
every floor of the
How do
home.
you even, I mean, it can kill you fairly quickly.
I don't know how fast, but yeah, the problem is people don't wake up.
Well, how
So
are you going to get out of the house if you're on the top floor, the whole house is filled up, you got
yeah,
to
if
hold your
you're
breath a
awake,
month.
you'd be able to run downstairs and get out.
Yeah.
That you'd be okay with. But you if the other thing is a lot of those carbon monoxide detectors are on the ceiling. So say you have your door open, carbon monoxide fills up over your bed before it hits that ceiling detector. You might have been in that for who knows how long before your ceiling detector goes off, and maybe you're not waking up from that.
Jesus Christ.
So that's where I think it's, the wall plugins are great because they're lower to the ground, but having one on your basement and your first floor I think are great safety precautions.
My God. That scared the shit out because I don't really think about it too often, you know what I mean? Everybody's so busy with their lives and your mind is in so many other places all the time that you
Yeah,
don't think about, one day through no fault of your own, there was just happened to be some kind of carbon monoxide leak from one of your appliances and all of a sudden,
yeah,
I remember there was a story a few years ago about an entire family that was just dead.
yeah, and that's the risk. So I always, it's not. Some other inspectors are like, "Oh, it's not part of building code. Why would you put that in your report?" And I'm like, I feel like I'm doing an injustice not making this recommendation to my clients by just, saying recommend installing a CO detector on every level of the home.
If there
Just
wasn't a better way to say get a home inspector.
yeah.
You will die. It's like that commercial or that movie
Yeah,
for like abstinence. Remember? I can't remember what movie it was. It's like if you have sex, you will die.
yeah. I
Um,
remember seeing that. Yeah, there's other little things too. Yeah, another one actually that came to mind now is the roofing, the downspouts on lower roofs. So if you've got a two-story house, quite often you'll have a lower section of roof over your garage or something like that. And it perfectly within building code, roofers will put that downspout draining onto the lower shingles, and that's acceptable because your shingles are meant to be waterproof. But what I see is, say that's a 25-year shingle, the shingles right below that downspout will wear out 5 or 10 years prematurely because
uh,
you have water now from a quarter or a half of your roof all draining into one spot. And if you look up on one of these lower downspouts after a rainstorm, even on a newer house, for like 2 hours after the rest of the roof is dry,
still
it's
wet.
still wet
Right.
because all those little trickles are coming down that one spot. So I say, I don't know why it's not building code. It'd probably take a roofer an extra 3 minutes to put an extension into the lower gutter. But I always make that recommendation to clients as well. I'm like, it'll save you replacing this patch of shingles 5 or 10 years prematurely. And it's like $15, $20 in parts. And, for someone who's not a roofer, maybe a couple minutes of time. But it's such a simple thing that could be added to the building code, but isn't yet.
Well, I'm always happy to have you on because I think that there's so much. You're just such a wealth of knowledge. It's like speaking to a human library of like
Well,
a
thanks.
inspection chat
10
GPT.
years of research.
That's amazing. You've been doing this 10 years now.
This is my 10th year now, yeah.
Wow. So you've
Yeah,
been in this about the same. I've been doing this like 8, 9 years.
yeah,
So
you were one of my earliest agents to connect and work with for a long time now.
a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you very much for coming in. This is something that I really strongly believe in, and I think that it's something that people should be giving a lot more thought to these days, and not just kind of swatting away an inspection condition. Um, I mean, obviously, I know lots of my clients have done it and, being in dire straits in a hot market, but
Yeah.
these days, man, take it
Yeah,
as
I
you can
totally
get.
understand, when there's 30 offers on a house. But I don't understand when people are like, well, actually, one of the funny ones I get all the time, and thank God for good agents sometimes, is the place was just beautifully renovated. I don't need an inspection. My agent thinks I should get one anyways. And I'm like, a renovated house you need an inspection more than anything because the home inspector is going to tell you where the things in the wall, like, we can't see behind walls, but was it wired properly? Was it plumbed properly? All this sort of stuff that you're not going to know when you got, you got beautiful granite countertops and engineered hardwood. Like, I mean, I don't care about that stuff when I'm going through a house. I care about your electrical, your plumbing, your heating and cooling, and any dangers in the house for you. So I've seen houses that look gorgeous, and they were beautifully renovated, and I've seen something that looks the exact same from the outside on the surface, and it's terrifying what the contractors did, what you can't see.
Right. So sometimes it's really beautiful, other times it's lipstick on a pig.
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
there you have it, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. And Kyle, where can people find you?
Uh, yeah, well, you mean like our website stuff?
Website, social media.
Um, Hard to spell. Hopefully, you'll put it up somewhere. The Martiniuk team, with Pillar to Post home inspectors. If you look that up, you'll find us online. Social media, we've got Facebook and Instagram. But yeah, the Martiniuk team is what you got to look up to find us, and we service all of York region, and around York Simcoe or Lake Simcoe as well. Um, yeah, and if you're working with Adam, he can give you our contact info as well.
He'll give you a great deal. Sorry. Thanks for coming in, man.
Thanks for having me.